And thanks for joining me again on A Bromley Wonders. Today is a pretty bloody interesting one, to be honest, and it's all about Great Bar Hall, which you probably know yourselves as, well, now the ruins of St. Margaret's Hospital, mental health kind of crazy hospital. But we'll go into all that. It's very fascinating. We have plenty of footage to go through of the ruins themselves because turns out there's some gaps in the fence where you can get in and have a little look. So pretty good, pretty good. So we're going to go through all of that. I'm going to catch you up on the history of the place, when it was built, when it changed hands, who lived there to put. I don't want to bore you. I'm just hitting you with the cool stuff. And then when it turned into the hospital, when that kind of closed, obviously, and then the ruins and what's happening since then. Who owns it now? Are there any plans for the future? And is it just going to be another iconic place that fizzles out into nothing, which seems to be the trend in Birmingham lately? So the first guy to move into what is known then as Nether House is Richard Scott of the Scott family, the namesake of Scott Arms down the road. Because I think the Scott family, I've generally figured out that it's the Scott family that owned the estate that is Great Bar at the time. So this is 1666, where we've got our first hearth tax return. Now, it is the same year as the Great Fire of London, so I don't know if these tax returns and finding out who has fireplaces is anything to do with that and the health and safety aspect of it all. I don't know. But all we have as information is this building called Nether House, where Great Bar Hall is now situated, had 5 hearths at the time, which is a lot of fireplaces, which means it's a fairly substantial building compared to many things in the area at that time in history. So the next bit of information that crops up is just a few years later in 1675, where Richard Scott is now dead. And now Mr. Taxman's coming back to do a probate inventory of what is in this house. I don't know if it's for the next person. What is it? Inheritance allowance? I don't know. But they're interested in what's going on. And we can kind of gauge the size of the building and how opulent it is by the inventory of just one room. So we're talking about the main chamber there, which is said to have included 2 joint beds, 2 feather beds, 1 bed and bolster, on a 1 wall bed, a table, a press, a chair, 3 stools, a trunk, a chest, 2 boxes, 5 baskets, and 1 mirror. So fancy stuff. Hasn't got a PlayStation yet, so he's keeping it low key, but he's pretty fancy and classical all at the same time. Turns out it's people dying that gives us the most information that we're ever going to get, because we've got the next 2 Scots who are going to die, which are William and Richard, his son, and they're dying in 1709 and 1715. And now the house is described as having extensions to the cellar, a buttery, a dairy house, a cockloft, and a barn, and of course more and more stuff. So yeah, it's starting to pick up in how fancy and expensive this estate is. And it's by 1760 that the house kind of changes description from being a farmhouse into something a little bit more extravagant and a building of more status. So this is where we can just start looking at this place as a mansion or a manor, as compared to like an old building that's been slowly upgraded as they go. Now you can see in the footage here, which I'm going to let you have a quick look at, is there's a walled garden, and there's a coach house, and there's stables now. This is all by 1762. 200. But walled gardens, quick cool little fact. I don't know if this is the general idea, but I think I went to Middleton Hall last October, and the walled gardens there, actually, were they the ones that actually had it? But yeah, walled gardens are just how you're going to grow vegetation and fruits and vegetables all year round, which is a pretty important thing back then, because it's very DIY unless you're going to pop to the market all the time, which these fancier people aren't up to doing. So the walled garden itself, there's fireplaces within the walls, which I've seen before in even the cemetery, Keyhill Cemetery and Brookfield Cemetery in Birmingham city centre by the Jewellery Quarter. There's hearths and fireplaces in the walls themselves. Now, sometimes you could look at that and go, oh, that must be part of a house and that's all been taken away, and these are just the exterior walls that are left and the fires are still there. But actually, a heated garden and a walled garden, they'd have fireplaces in the walls to keep the walls warm, which let like vine plants grow throughout the winter and bits like that. So you'd have little chimneys on the corners of these walled gardens to let all the smoke out, obviously. But I just thought that's pretty fascinating. If you didn't know that, tell your friends, it's a cool one. So in 1777, it's Joseph Scott who now owns the house, and he's just married a lovely lady who comes with a fat little wedge of cash, around £2,000, and he uses that money to majorly reconstruct the building and turn it into a bit more of an opulent mansion. Now there is a little photo of this, and it's an engraving from 1832, so it's even this is like 60 years on. But there's the drawing, very cool. And it's quite similar to how it looks now, I guess. But I think, yeah, obviously more changes have happened since then because it's gone through many stages of what the building actually is. So this is where the spacious dining room is added, and other rooms and conveniences such as, I mean, who knows? Because there's descriptions from these times now. I know Samuel Galton's about to move in, and his daughter Mary Ann, she's got a diary. It's probably the only description of what actually went on in that house at the time, and she's describing it as like almost 5 separate houses in one, which isn't like, because it has been adapted, it's not been rebuilt at this point. So she's just describing it as, you know, what would you call it, tribes essentially in the house. But ultimately they have one lovely dining room where they can all come together, but generally everyone's technically living in kind of separate lives within these separate dwellings within one big mansion. Around 1830, there's a clock tower thrown up. It's starting to look the part now, very Downton Abbey, I imagine. And there's a chapel being thrown up too by 1863. And it's not actually a real chapel. It's not consecrated. There's no religious stuff going on. It's a bit of a folly all in. And a folly just being a kind of, you get him in old, what was his name? Capability Brown. He'd build your garden and he'd like carve the landscape for you so it looked bloody beautiful. And he'd throw up a castle or two maybe. And they wouldn't be functioning. They'd just be kind of almost silhouettes, but built of stone, very nicely done. And you see these around Broadway. You see them around Worcester, heading out towards Hereford. They're kind of everywhere in that. Heading south, Oxford, Cambridge, all those bits. Not many around here, but we could look at this chapel as a folly. It was used for billiards and a trophy room. So it's just one of those lads party rooms, but back in the 17th, 19th century, in the 19th century, yes. So yeah, in between all of that crazy stuff going on, that Joseph Scott who did all of the rebuild with his £2,000 that he got from his missus, he spent too much, ran out of money, and had to lease the building out for 99 years to a gentleman called Samuel Galton, who is part of what we know as the Birmingham Lunar Society now. And there's plenty more on that to come up. I'm actually currently making a series on the priestly riots of 1791, and all of these names will be popping up because it's quite Lunar Society focused. Dr.priestly being one of the society, and writings of Samuel's daughter, Mary Ann Galton. But you can search this as Mary Ann Schimmelpenninck Galton. Her diary is on archives.org, and you can look for all that writings as a child. I know she's writing this when she's like 71. It's really interesting. But she's describing all these visitors from the society and how fascinating they were, and all their travels, and they'd tell her of Egypt, and they'd tell her of, I don't know, Haiti or wherever the hell they're heading. But it's really interesting when all of that's coming from back in those days, because obviously entertainment's quite hard to come by. So these younger people at the time, just fascinated by information, which I think is something that's starting to hit me pretty hard. And a quick adage to the old Lunar Society thing. The moonstones that are on the roundabout just by Asda Queslit as you drive round, they're actually the moonstones in kind of dedication to the Lunar Society. Don't know who put them there. I think that was in the millennium. But just a weird thing that they do that, I think, based on kind of the esoteric nature of people who run this world. But that's another conversation. And let's not forget that all the surrounding lands belong to this guy too. And there's writings by Charles Pye in 1818, who's taken a stroll around Birmingham and wrote all about what he saw, which seems to be a thing that happens every so many years. William Hutton being another historian of Birmingham, Leyland, the historian of Henry VIII. And it's these guys' writings that give us all the information, and just the nuanced information of what it actually was to walk around there, not just the facts and figures, but what did it look like, how did it feel, And these are the things that fascinate me anyway to read. I think they're really good. But he's describing the place, he's describing the little lakes that are down at the bottom and how high or low those waters sit as in comparison to the house, how the house looks like in comparison to where you view it from afar. So he's even saying you can see, and Marianne Schimmelpenninck also mentioned this, but you can see the Clent Hills, the Malverns, Dudley Castle. You can just see everything from these high peaks because it's basically Barbican where they are. So yeah, it really just brings home what a lovely scene it was before. I mean, the Industrial Revolution's kicking off now, and there'll be smoke kicking up everywhere, and there's still a hell of a lot of countryside too. And even when you do kind of still go there today, the land itself, when you're walking around like the walled garden, and you kind of, I'll try and get you a vision of this. I'll throw it up on the screen. But the amount of just expanse of land, even now, it does make you feel like you could be miles and miles and miles away from the city centre, when in fact you're only 5 miles away. And yeah, that's pretty fascinating, isn't it? So it's 1909 when the Scott family is starting to fizzle out, and it's just left with Lady Scott, and she dies, and then it's just an auction then to sell it all off because there's no one to take it on. I think some of the family are in Australia, they're doing their own thing now, and they don't really need the hall. The world is moving on, and I think holding on to houses like this just isn't viable. Obviously, the world wars are about to kick off, so just everything's going to change. So probably well timed, but the house is put up for auction, and it is bought by the Poor Law Guardians of West Bromwich. And the Poor Laws, I mean, at the time, we can look at Josiah Mason as far as, say, Erdington history goes, and it's just these philanthropists, essentially, who would be building houses for women who are a little bit crazy or single and their husbands have gone missing or mad, kids of women, of parents who aren't married, and there's a certain stigma to that back in the day. So it's just like teaching them, getting them into, and like honestly, it's like either go to jail or go to one of these houses at the time as a young person was your two best options. If not, you're just an urchin on the street. You probably go into prostitution, you're going to robbing, you'd be like Oliver Twist and all that kind of stuff. Or you can go and get educated. And some people are lucky and they have good experiences in these schools, and you can read about them today because people are still knocking about from when these facilities were around. But yeah, so the Poor Law thing was just basically a big old agreement across the country that you have to look after these people, and it's probably more centered in just keeping them off the streets because it doesn't look good, one, and crime's just going to get rife. So you kind of force these people into education, you house them, you get them used to the working hours of the world, and then hopefully they can slot into society just right by the time you kick them out again. So the Poor Law people have bought this, and it's going to be a hospital very soon. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. So it's by 1914 they add a new building to the estate after they've purchased it and all that jazz. And the first thing they throw up is Derby House, which is in the walled garden bit, which is in the video here. You can see it. And we'll throw up this photo here so you can see where that was situated. This is just how I've gathered it to come together. I'm not too sure, but it looks like it's this garden where this wooden Frenchy house is thrown up. And this is to house the TB patients, but the people with TB. Obviously you want them away from the main building, don't you? Because dirty. But eventually that wooden building on the walled garden, that becomes just more space for the children of the home at the hall. Because obviously, I mean, it just gives you the idea of just how many people need and use these spaces, which just tells you all you need to know about birth control. So where on that Nether Hall Avenue, where you can drive up now, and it's a lovely estate, and it does look very much like Highcroft Hall with its little clock tower and all the kind of big round horseshoe. I think it's called Horseshoe Close or whatever. Even now, that's the bit that's thrown up post World War One, and it's for the high-grade mental deficiencies of the patients on site. Now, you can only put this down to post-traumatic stress disorder. Things like that. The war would have absolutely ruined the minds of so many people. This is all built and called Great Bar Colony, which I think is a pretty interesting name for it. But yeah, they split that whole horseshoe section out into a men's side and a female side. And it's another post-war thing, but it's 1948, which brings the start of the NHS. and with all the new kind of mental health acts and things that you have to provide under that. More expansion, more rooms, more everything for all these mentally deficient, they call them, people who would be coming home from war, and there's a lot of them. So yeah, I think the hall side, so it's not quite the horseshoe thing now, like the whole estate side is men's, and then it's all women on the other side. And there is I've got a bit of video here where it is the, what was it, the chief male nurse, their room, nice wooden kind of sign above the door that's still there today, which is pretty creepy but pretty cool. And it's at this point when the NHS is formed in the 1948 bit where it's called St Margaret's now. Now, I'm not going to dive into the history of who St Margaret is, but I imagine that's interesting all on its own. But I'm going to try and pull this to a close as far as that's a quick recap on the history of the area and the buildings and what happened. But yeah, it was 1997 where they decide to close this facility down. I'm not sure on the reasons why, if it's funding, probably. And then, yeah, the last of the mental deficient people, the high grade ones, they remain on site until 2004. I imagine they were just waiting for them to die or waiting for new things, new facilities like Highcroft to be, well, Northcroft in Erdington to be rebuilt as well. And then you've got these padded rooms ready for these people. So that's the end of the history of technically Never House and Great Bar Hall in St Margaret's and what are now the ruins. And I'm going to leave you, and I'll probably do a little bit of commentary over the top of this, but videos of the ruins where we visited last week. And it's very interesting, very hard to get your head around what's in front of you, to be honest. It's just the shell. Loads of vandalism has been going on. Apparently it's very recent again that even the chapel roof that's burnt down now, it was burnt down before, but now it's collapsed, and that's only happened very recently. So worth getting down there just to have a nose before more things happen. Yeah, there are plans by some company to turn this into a conference and wedding venue and parkland and whatever else, but I don't see that happening. But I could be wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. It would be nice to see. But if not, it'd just be nice to see this whole thing preserved or something, if the National Trust could take it on. Because the parkland surrounding it is beautiful. Even now, if you head down, it's just worth taking the dog down, take the family down. It's an amazing place to have a picnic, really. And there is parking near the kind of gate at the top of the horseshoe if you take your car up there. If not, park in Asda for free and walk down. It's not that far away. But yeah, I'll try and keep Dobbs on what's actually going on there in, like, from now on, and I'll keep you updated if I find anything out. But it's been beautiful. I hope you enjoyed that. Very quick fire bit of information. I'd like to thank Great Bar at b43.co.uk for a lot of this information. Just wanted to get it out there in a package, and I hope there's no offence in me using the way you've collated. It's just amazing, so why would I do it myself? Fair play to you. I do want to take you down the diary of Mary Ann Schimmel Pennick Galton as well, because it's fascinating the way she writes about the area. So that'll be a separate video that I want to touch on. But yeah, if you like this new layout and format, please let me know. If it's awful, let me know. But I hope you've liked it. This has been a Brummie Wonders. Thank you for joining me.
That I knew was beyond all consoling. The beat of my heart was a bell that was tolling.